problems facing African Americans today, and who's to blame for those problems? And whose responsibility is it to make changes? Questions we've been asking and will continue to ask as we begin the second half hour of It's Your Call. Hello again, everyone. I'm Lynn Doyle. We'd like to give you an opportunity to weigh in on our topic here tonight. If you have a question or a comment, you can email me at cn8.tv. You can also take our web poll there. Let's check in and see what people are telling us about the main issues facing blacks today. Well, prejudice does not seem to be getting the numbers that typically it gets on this show. Lack of education, 33%, and gun violence, which we have not yet really touched on, 50%. Think that that's the biggest problem. 17% say it's a matter of apathy. If you'd like to tell us what you think, we are here. We are waiting to hear from you. cn8.tv is the way that you can get in touch with us. Just before the break, we were talking about how all of these issues seem to be interlocked. You know, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg syndrome, which came first. We've all agreed that education obviously is a priority and should be, but it not always is. And a lot of times that's because the family unit is not strong. And because the family unit is not strong, many times young girls and boys are then procreating without any rhyme or reason or any plan for the future. And so it just kind of, the poverty perpetuates itself. What do we do?
I wanted to just address for a second the idea of young girls being impregnated willy-nilly. And I think studies have shown that most of these young girls are impregnated by men, not by peer relationships, but by older men in their 20s and 30s who take advantage of them and promise and provide to them the sense of parenting that they perhaps are not having at home. So I wanted to address the need that young women and young men have to be loved. And some of this can be broken down to that essential point, that people are looking for love in all of the wrong places.
And I just wanted to,
can I just finish? Let me just finish what I'm saying. May I just finish what I'm saying, please? May I just finish what I'm saying, please? And what I'm saying is that we have to make sure that we provide the structures in our community. And that can be done not only by people who live in the community, but by government as well, who steps up to the fore and says, we're going to have after-school care. Right. We're going to have structured activities for children after school as well.
But Rhonda, the government can step in and do that. But to Lisa's point, what about children who are mimicking their parents? That happens across the board, whether it's black, white, Chinese, Mexican, whatever. But what if they are mimicking what
I have to say this, they come home to their mothers. Because I live in Newark, I'm so passionate. They come, and not just Newark, a lot of inner cities. I work in Harlem, all over the country. Okay. They come home to their mothers. They have a different man in their bed this week. They broke up with that man. Next year, they have another man. And then they're having babies by each man. And then they have the nerve to tell their daughter.
How many of that?
Let me finish my point. They have a nerve to tell their daughters, you know, use a condom, but they see that you're not doing it. Oprah Winfrey is not your child's role model. You are. They're mimicking their mothers. It's not always rape. You're saying it's always. Sometimes it is their mother's boyfriend. Sometimes it is the next door neighbor's son. But they're mimicking their moms.
I would recommend abstinence programs, better sex education. I also would recommend parenting techniques.
That work?
Yeah. Well, in some communities it does. I would also recommend parenting techniques, and I also think that we have to take responsibility in the African American community to have what I call real sex talks with children, and the terminology that they're accustomed to. And I think also is letting them know from a social work perspective that if you're dealing with issues of depression and abandonment, then what we need to do is we need to talk to you and we need to get you in counseling, as opposed to looking for love in the wrong places, whether it be with peers, whether it be with older men and things of that nature. It has to be real talks about sexuality.
What message needs to be sent to the African American men? That if you know, you step up to the plate, that you have to be responsible?
Be responsible.
I like the fact that we're talking about education as one of the issues, because there is research out there that says that the longer you are in an educational program, the more education you have, the longer you put off having a family. And we need to, once again, I hate beating a dead horse, but we need to go back to focusing on the fact that we need to educate our young people, provide them opportunities before and after school, keep them off the streets,
keep them busy,
provide them with a social support network of caring adults.
Okay.
To begin to address some of these issues.
If the adult is home, I work around the country speaking to kids. There are lots of after-school programs, and I find that a lot of parents don't even know that they're there because they're in the street, they're on drugs, they're junkies, they're out there prostituting themselves to support the habit of drugs. Not all, but I'm speaking of those who do.
I'm glad that you mentioned
and the
drugs,
kids,
because we've talked about education, we've talked about family, but we haven't talked about the impact of drugs. Not only, again, this is an issue that faces a lot of different people across the country, but the African American community community is being hit hard by drugs.
In the African American community, looking at things from a DNA, drug and alcohol perspective, men were accustomed to being on drugs and getting off of drugs, and because it's just the rehab situations with them. And with the African American women, it's the guilt that's associated with the fact that I used crack and, you know, I lost my children and things like that. And so we have a lot of African American women who are struggling, and we have a lot of African American men who, because of the mere fact that, not all of them, but, you know, quite a few of them who are on drugs, they get off of drugs, they get back on drugs. But for a lot of women, it's been hard because it's the fact that, man, I lost my entire family and these drugs brought me down. I think one of the things that we also see is the introduction of 1985 with the drug marketing. And we saw that in the crack epidemic that was ushered in that really just devastated the black community, where we had, you know, women that would use drugs, but we never had women having babies in the hospital and then leaving the baby in the hospital and going back and having a crack baby. And so we had that.
So whose responsibility is that to address that drug problem?
Well, the responsibility, I think, is the entire community. I think that you have it from social work perspective, you have it from just the perspective of social services. I think it's also the responsibility of those parents who are impacted by this. So, for instance, if this mother is having some challenges with drugs, she has to have a caring, nurturing family member who can talk to her and get her in rehab or get him in rehab.
We can't talk about...
Can I just say that I think since the mid-'80s, with the increase in impact of crack and cocaine in our communities, and not only, again, in our communities, but in all communities, heroin, all of those drug usages have increased. But there has not been a response from government. And there is personal responsibility. I'm not going to say anything about the lack of personal responsibility. There should be. Yes. Wow. But everybody has responsibility. Not only does the person have responsibility, but government has responsibility, corporations have responsibility, everyone has their own responsibility. So instead of incarcerating people and creating more children in foster care, why not create treatment centers, more treatment centers?
You know, I'm glad that you brought that up, because one thing that we may have just mentioned, I'm not even sure if I mentioned it at the very top of the show or not, is the whole concept of how many African American men particularly are incarcerated in this country, and the impact that that's having on your communities. And so many of them are incarcerated in association with drugs.
In the early 1980s, I think, and violent crimes, 200,000.
Again, that whole chicken and egg thing.
Well,
people were incarcerated.
That was said, you know, and once again, I'm so sick of our excuses. Many blacks have said, and we've heard it all before, well, the white man brings the drugs over on boats and planes, the white man brings it to Newark, white man brings it to New York, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, all these inner cities. And that is probably true.
No, it is true.
But the white man didn't slam a needle in your arm, the white man didn't put a pill in your mouth, and he didn't give you a crack pipe to smoke.
No,
but the white, let me finish my point. So my thing becomes, I walk up and down in inner city and I see junkies and drug dealers every day. I do not feel inspired to get a needle and shoot myself up with dope. You have to be able to say no to drugs. Don't keep saying it's the white man. The white man didn't make you do it.
You're absolutely right that we won't say the white man, but from an institutional standpoint, looking at legislation, that white kid in that suburban area who has cocaine and he's caught is not going to do as much time as that black or Latino brown kid who has crack cocaine.
Because if
so the reality is, it has to be equality and equity across the board.
If this is the reason why blacks shouldn't do drugs, if it's a racist society, why are you going to do what the white boy does? He's going to get off and you're not. All the more reasons to stay off of drugs.
That's a good reason, but that's not the reality. And the reality is that more white people are using. The reality is more white people do drugs than black. The reality is that more black people are in jail because of drugs than whites. So yes, it is a racist, systemic justice problem that needs to be addressed by America. Again, it gets to what impact.
Do you truly believe that there are more? Do you truly believe that there are more black people committing crime in the United States of America?
No, I do not.
No.
But
I said one black doing
more black males, but more black males are more incarcerated in the prison industrial complex than white males are.
I'm of the opinion that the devastation of drugs in our community is yet just a symptom of a deeper underlying issue. We have not yet talked about, well, why is drugs so prolific in our community? Profit margin, lack of jobs, lack of additional resources. We have to dig a little bit deeper to address this drug issue. and we just have not done it.
You're right. And then if you tie in the drug issue with the violence issue, if you're on 12th Street and I'm on 10th, and you come over to 12th and you say that you want to take my corner and you want to sell drugs, well, it's escalating into violence, because who am I going to call? I'm not going to pick up my cell phone, call the cops and says, you know, he wants to come over and take, you know, my corner. And so what we have is violence, and so what we have is just this drug.
It's violence between the drug dealers and the lay people, because I go into the post office on Frelinghuysen Avenue in Newark, and I've got to walk in that door every day, and a junkie's in there holding the door open for me, and I'm scared I'm going to get stuck with a hypodermic needle. And he says, give me $1. One day I got so mad, I said, you need to give me a quarter. I need it. He gave it to me. How funny was that?
Okay, do you think
the bum paid me money.
That there's money obviously associated with the drugs, and if there's not money associated with legitimate work, that the kids coming up see that, hey, the drug dealers are doing well. They're driving the fancy cars, and they're making,
once again, I think
you know, a name
it goes
for
back to
themselves.
what the gentleman here was saying. It's back to education. We're not talking about education in the sense that you have to go to one of the best schools or whatever the case may be, but letting young people know, what are you good at? Because a lot of those young guys on the corner are good in business. They're good in marketing. They have skills. Let's tap into those skills in a positive manner.
On that note, I have to take a break. I'm sorry, the hour is just flying by so fast, and we still have so much more to talk about. Guns, violence, drugs, all of that. We're going to continue our conversation, and we have to get back to who has the biggest influence on African Americans today. We want to know what you think about that. Email me at cn8.tv and tell me, is it the church? Is it the community? Is it the parents? Who should it be? Maybe it's rap music to blame for everything. That's coming up in our next segment.
For more discussion on tonight's topic, please join Arthur Fennell when he hosts a special town hall meeting with entertainer Bill Cosby, Friday night at 9, right here on CN8.